Hello everyone, welcome to the fourth edition of EP-Edge August 2025. I'm Dr. Niraj Sharma. Today we'll go in depth into factor 11 inhibition, which potentially could change the whole anticoagulation landscape. Factor 11 is part of the intrinsic coagulation pathway, and it usually becomes active in a pro-thrombotic state and has minimal or really no activity during physiologic coagulation. The whole idea of utilizing factor 11 as a target for anticoagulation came from genetic studies in patients who had partial deficiency of factor 11. And it was found in those patients that they had really minimal or no thrombosis, i.e. a very low risk for strokes. The data thus far has been mixed. Two trials, the Pacific and the Oceanic AF trials, have shown significant reduction in bleeding, but efficacy remains a little dubious. There are, however, two other trials with two different agents currently underway that may shed more light into factor 11 inhibition. Okay, get ready to deep dive into the August 2025 issue 4A of EP-Edge. And as mentioned previously, this is AI narration of my LinkedIn newsletter, issue 4A, August 2025. Note, this has been personally vetted by me for accuracy. You'll find during this AI presentation that there's some mispronunciation, particularly for factor 11. I hope you'll keep that in mind and excuse me for that discrepancy. Okay, let's deep dive.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into something cutting edge, factor EVA inhibition. We're looking at how it might change the game for stroke prevention, particularly for people with atrial fibrillation, AF.
Yeah, and the core mission here, it's pretty ambitious, actually. We're trying to effectively stop those dangerous clots around thromboembolic suppression, but, and this is the key part, decouple that completely from the risk of serious bleeding.
Okay, that sounds like the ideal scenario, almost the holy grail, right?
It really is an anticoagulation.
So factor EVA specifically, why that target? We already have pretty effective drugs like the factor Z inhibitors. What makes this pathway potentially better?
Well, it's about the biology, which is quite distinct. Factor EVA, it really pushes thrombin generation hard, but mainly in prothrombotic situations, disease states like in AF.
Right.
But crucially, it doesn't seem to play a big role in baseline hemostasis.
Baseline hemostasis. Maybe break that down a bit for us, for those not deep in hematology.
Sure, yeah. That's just your body's everyday clotting system. Stopping a paper cut, handling a minor bruise, that kind of thing. Essential stuff.
Got it.
So the idea is we're targeting the clotting that happens because of the disease, not the clotting your body needs just for living. And the initial clue, the sort of aha moment, it came from observing people naturally born with low factor ECIL. They tend to have fewer strokes, fewer clots overall, but without a corresponding big increase in bleeding problems.
Interesting. So nature kind of provided the proof of concept.
Exactly, and set the stage perfectly for thinking, okay, maybe we can mimic this pharmacologically.
Which leads us to the first big safety test. Abelacimab comes to mind. If that theory holds, you'd expect to see way less bleeding compared to what we use now. Did AZALEA TIMI 71 show that?
It did, emphatically.
Yeah.
That trial delivered a really strong safety signal. We saw about a 62% reduction in major or clinically relevant non-major bleeding compared to rivaroxaban.
Wow, 62%.
Yeah, it was dramatic. It basically confirmed the core hypothesis right there.
Okay, that's impressive on the safety side. So why aren't these drugs everywhere yet? What happened when they started testing efficacy, actually preventing strokes?
Right, and that's where the story gets a bit more nuanced. Just hitting the target doesn't automatically mean it works effectively for the endpoint you want.
Meaning?
Well, take asundexian. It showed a better bleeding profile, definitely. But then the big Oceanic AF trial, that got stopped early.
Why?
Because it turned out it wasn't preventing strokes or systemic embolism as well as apixaban. It was actually inferior on efficacy.
Oof. So safer bleeding profile, but didn't work well enough.
Exactly. It really highlights that success isn't guaranteed. It likely depends on the specific drug, maybe the dose, the trial design, Lots of factors.
Which makes the ongoing trials absolutely critical. We're keeping a close eye on abelacimab again in LILAC TIMI 76. That one's looking at efficacy versus placebo, but specifically in patients who are already at high risk for bleeding.
Yes, a very important group. And then there's milvexian with the LIBREXIA AF trial. That's the big head-to-head against apixaban.
High stakes there. The results from those could really shape the future, couldn't they?
Absolutely. If these factor HA inhibitors do deliver on both safety and efficacy in these trials, well, the implications are pretty huge.
How so? What changes clinically?
It could fundamentally change who we can offer anticoagulation to. Think about all the patients right now who we hesitate to put on current drugs because their bleeding risk is just too high.
Right, they're sort of left unprotected pharmacologically.
Precisely. If these new agents work and are safer, we could potentially bring those patients into the fold, giving them effective protection they can't safely get now.
Okay, so it expands eligibility. How does that impact something like left atrial appendage occlusion, or LAAO? That's the procedure some patients get now if they can't take anticoagulants long term.
Good question. LAAO's main role today is really for those patients with contraindications to long-term drugs. If we suddenly have a highly effective pharmacological option with much lower bleeding risk,
then LAAO becomes less necessary for that group.
Potentially, yeah. Its role might become more niche, maybe reserved for very specific anatomical reasons, or patients who fail in these newer drugs. Rather than being the go-to for anyone deemed high bleed risk, it'll become a more selective strategy.
Makes sense. Okay, before we wrap up on AF, let's shift gears for just a second. We often do a quick, actionable insight on these deep dives. Something practical for health? We hear 10,000 steps a day all the time. What's the real story there based on recent research?
Yeah, the 10,000 number's everywhere, isn't it? But a good review, I think it was in Lancet Public Health, looked at this again, and it found that while more steps are generally better, most of the significant risk reduction for major health outcomes, it actually tends to plateau somewhere between 5,000 and 7,000 steps a day.
Plateau. So the big gains happen before 10,000?
Largely, yes. Getting up to around 7,000 steps a day gives you a huge chunk of the benefit compared to being sedentary.
How huge? What kind of numbers are we talking about?
Well, compared to someone doing, say, only 2,000 steps a day, hitting that 7,000 mark was linked to significantly lower risks, something like a 47% lower risk of all-cause mortality.
Wow, nearly half.
Yeah. So that 7,000 steps becomes a much more achievable, realistic target for many people, but still offers substantial health benefits. A good public health message, maybe?
Definitely more encouraging than 10,000 for some folks.
Yeah.
That's a great takeaway. Okay, back to AF and factor AF. Given the mixed results so far, like with Oceanic AF, what keeps this area the next frontier? Why is there still so much hope pinned on it?
Because the fundamental promise is still there, and it's revolutionary. If these upcoming trials are successful, factor A inhibition proves you can fundamentally change that risk calculation. You can target the specific pathology, the intrinsic coagulation pathway's role in disease, without crippling essential hemostasis.
It validates the whole biological concept.
Exactly. Yeah. And that success then opens up a really provocative question for the future, something for you listeners to mull over.
Which is?
If we can successfully target factor C this way, what other specific coagulation factors, involved only in particular disease states, could we potentially inhibit selectively down the road? Could we find even more targeted ways to treat clotting disorders without causing bleeding? That's the exciting horizon this research opens up.
Factor 11 inhibition has great promise, and unfortunately we'll have to wait till October 2026 for the milvexian LILAC TIMI 76 trial, and then May of 2027 for the abelacimab LIBREXIA trial. If these trials are positive for both reduced bleeding and decreased risk for stroke, you can imagine how disruptive in a good way these trials would be. Thank you again for joining me on this episode of EP Edge. If you need data source and infographics, this can be found in my LinkedIn newsletter. I'd love to hear from you. You can email me at epedgecast@gmail.com or via LinkedIn. This is Dr. Niraj Sharma. Bye for now.